After going through the DPS test results in the PTR for Mythic raiding, today we go over the healers. Now, obviously, the healers care a little bit less about whether or not the boss is single target damage, cleave damage, or AoE, because they are healing. What they care about generally is gonna be the damage profile of the boss. How often are the damage spikes going to come? Do they line up with their powerful cooldowns, etc, etc. We can still though find some interesting takes, especially to look at the effects of the possible changes to tier sets, the possible changes from the first tuning of about 10 days ago, and then the second round of tuning from about 2 to 3 days ago, which did go and touch a few healers. For example, Druid got its mana cost change, Preservation was buffed in its Fluttering Seedlings, we had quite a few changes to Mistweaver Monks, a few changes to the Priest specs, nerfs to Holy Paladin, so we can also see the effects of these changes. Starting from the first boss, Gnarlroot in Mythic was testable, was killed by many of the groups in the PTR, being the first boss of the raid, and we see in this boss Mistweaver Monk being the highest average HPS out of all healers, followed closely by 3 specs, almost next to each other: Paladin, Preservation, and Discipline. And then we have a small gap. After these 3, we have Resto Druid lower down with Holy Priest, and then Restoration Shaman more clear at the bottom. So the first in line for performance is Mistweaver Monk. Mistweaver Monk is receiving quite a powerful set of synergy in 10.2, which allows them to have a lot of power around Invigorating Mist. Now, for those who are not too used with Mistweaver Monk, haven't seen many Mistweaver Monks recently or ever, what is going on is basically the monk is casting Invoke Yulon first. After casting Invoke Yulon, they spam Enveloping Mist for a bit, and after spamming Enveloping Mist for a bit, they can go back and spam Vivify. The combo works because Invoke Yulon makes your Enveloping Mist be 50% cheaper. So you spam Enveloping Mist, which on top of healing also buffs your targets to receive 30% more healing. Then once you have spread Enveloping Mist around, you can spam Vivify. And Vivify, thanks to Invigorating Mists, spreads the healing to all of the targets with Renewing Mist, therefore turning a single target heal into a 4, 5, 6 target heal. And the result is, of course, a lot of healing with Invigorating Mist. What makes this even stronger is the tier set of Monk. Renewing Mist increases the target's healing taken from you by 50%. So on top of the already 30% heal increase buff of Enveloping Mist, you also have the extra 50% from the tier set bonus. On top of that, the 4-piece set bonus stores 15% of all of this healing, including the overhealing, and then makes it blow up at the end of its duration, with a pretty significant heal. As you can see here, with Chi Harmony is a pretty decent part of their healing done. This is very powerful for Mistweaver thanks to their follow-up talent on Yulon, the choice to either buff the cooldown or to reduce the cooldown from a 3-minute cooldown to a 1-minute cooldown, but halving the duration down to 12 seconds, means Mistweaver now has cycles of powerful 1-minute windows where they can have pretty powerful AoE spread healing, which is gonna fit quite nicely for every boss, of course, with a damage profile with heavy AoE damage every minute or so. It will fit quite nicely with their healing profile. That is how they are performing right now, at least looking at the first boss in Mythic, which is Gnarlroot. Moving on to Igira, which is our second boss. Primarily single target boss for DPS players. Again, it's not that healers care. We see in here that this time, once more, Mistweaver Monk is the highest performing of the healers, followed closely once more by both Holy Paladin and Preservation Evoker. This time the gap also includes Discipline Priest, and also, once more, the 2 healers at the bottom are Holy Priest and Restoration Shaman. Now, going on to one of the healers in here, being Evoker. Evoker has perhaps a dangerous situation, maybe for other healers more so than Evoker. And that's the fact that Evoker is doing quite well with the Emerald Blossom build. However, they are also able to do quite well with their standard build as an Evoker. So you still have your Dreambread, Spirit Bloom, Temporal Anomaly build you have right now doing alright, and then you also have available your Emerald Blossom build, which is, as quite self-explanatory, doing quite well. This is perhaps a bit surprising, because the current tier of Preservation Evoker isn't really synergizing around Emerald Blossom. It's quite a weird situation, because your 2-piece makes your Empower spells cast Living Flame at enemies or allies, which has nothing to do with Emerald Blossom. Also, Living Flame has a chance to apply Echo at 100% effectiveness, which also doesn't do much for your Emerald Blossom. Now, you might say, well, but you know, if you look at the Evoker talent tree, there is this talent right here which makes your Living Flame have a chance to make your next Essence ability free. So being able to spam free Living Flames with your Empower ability is gonna give you a free Essence to spend in Emerald Blossom, right? The thing is, your current 4-piece set bonus in Aberrus is already giving you quite a lot of free essences to spend. And even now, only very late into this tier, Emerald Blossom became a more valuable build. So it's not that you're gaining even more essences to spend in 10.2 compared to now. So even though you're not even gaining that much for this specific build, for this specific Blossom build in 10.2, Evoker does still seem to be performing at quite a average high HPS right now in the PTR. Of course, as long as you can keep the raid somewhat stacked for your Blossoms to be able to have max value. Moving on to the third boss, which is a very special boss for a council fight for DPS, not really that special for healers. You have, once more, Preservation Evoker being one of the best performing, in this case the best performing of the healers. Holy Paladin is still one of the best performers. What is perhaps a bit surprising is Mistweaver Monk, out of nowhere, particularly for this fight, is the lowest of the healers, who continues once more to be overall amongst the highest and best performers is Holy Paladin. Now, we have mentioned once more that Holy Paladin received another round of tuning, and that tuning means a nerf. In particular, nerf to their mana and nerf to their very powerful healing of their 2-piece set bonus. So the result here, with Holy Paladin doing quite well, once more, not in Moon Runes, but in English, you can see that the playstyle stays somewhat the same. You keep spamming Holy Shock and you dump your Holy Power with Light of Dawn, and you just rinse and repeat. You just mostly ignore most of the other abilities. This is consistent with most of the Holy Paladins that will be logging on this fight, regardless of the performance. You still have more or less the same. You have, as we mentioned in our video about Holy Paladin, a split. Some Paladins are doing the use Holy Shock, spam Light of Dawn. Some more Paladins are using the Holy Shock, spam, but then split your time between Flash of Light and Light of Dawn. So wasting more Holy Power instead of spending it all in Light of Dawn to cast more Flash of Lights. More or less the result at the moment is still the same, still performing quite nicely as a healer. The difference, of course, is that when you spam more Flash of Light, you end up doing only 4000 DPS. You don't stay in melee and use your melee abilities like Crusader Strike, for example, whereas here you do more than twice the DPS, you stay more in melee, and you do more damage overall. That's the main difference whenever you are or not using Flash of Light as a heal for a Paladin. But even despite another round of nerfs, the performance of Holy Paladin in the raid continues to be positive. Now, the last of the proper positive ones is Discipline. So Discipline, going back to a boss with some longer logs like this one right here. Discipline, of course, is quite hard to check when you look at logs, because logs will just tell you this. What can you tell from just Atonement, right? You can see, of course, a bit more from the casts when you look at a Discipline Priest, and that's very important because, for example, especially if you were used to Discipline, you will notice that in here, for example, we are missing Shadow Covenant, and we are missing, for example, Schism. This was part of the, iteration of Blizzard attempting to remove some buttons, to have some button bloat reduction for Discipline Priest, which includes turning Schism into a passive. So now Schism is cooked into your Mind Blast. Mind Blast no longer has 2 charges, it only has 1 now, but you don't have to cast Schism, which is very good for your ramp. On top of that, you also don't have to cast Shadow Covenant anymore, because Shadow Covenant is now cooked into Shadow Fiend. Now this is of course a little bit of a nerf. If you go back to the current live version, Shadow Covenant has a 30-second cooldown for 7 seconds of duration. If you go to 10.2, Shadow Covenant will have a 15-second duration, but now it has a 3-minute cooldown because it's tied to Shadow Fiend. Obviously, you are more incentivized now to go and take Void Summoner, to reduce the cooldown of your Shadow Fiend by 4 seconds whenever you use one of your damaging abilities. The cooldown can be reduced by quite a lot. If you look at the Shadow Fiend usages, you have 1 use at 7 seconds and then 1 use at 1:16. That is almost a full 2 minutes of cooldown reduction. And then you have 1:17 to 2:52, so it's a 1:30 minute cooldown reduction. So the cooldown of Shadow Fiend can be reduced by quite a lot. It can be reduced by so much that it's not even worth to go and pick up Mindbender, because basically it would mean with a Mindbender that you would have a near permanent duration on your Shadow Covenant, which is not that necessary for Discipline, as Discipline heals, as we all know, in bursts. So you don't really need to have Shadow Covenant active here and here and here and here, because you have all of your stuff on cooldown. Your Radiance is on cooldown, your Mind Blast is on cooldown, your Penance is on cooldown, etc, etc. So it's much better to have these 90-second windows. 90-second windows which are also very cool because they line up with things like Rapture, which has a 90-second cooldown. They line up with things like Evangelism, which has a 90-second cooldown. So now you also have an easier time lining up your cooldowns, even with this Shadow Fiend and its cooldown being reduced. However, as we are done talking about the good ones, we have to spend a moment to talk about the bad ones, because the opposite of Discipline at the moment is Holy. We went through Gnarlroot, where Holy was the second worst performing one. We went through Igira, where Holy was the second worst performing one, and we went through Council, where Holy was the second worst performing one. This has been a constant for Holy Priest throughout most of the fights, because their healing has been more or less butchered by Blizzard with the changes. So the main issue for Holy is mostly making Prayer of Mending much weaker by losing the power of the tier set, being able to spam and spread Prayer of Mending around. Now the tier is much more centered around Renew healing. First of all, now you have the Renew being left behind by your Holy Wards, and then the 4-piece which lets you cast way more Holy Wards, way more often. This is the reason, for example, why Salvation's cooldown reduction was cut in half. Previously, using a Holy Ward cut the cooldown of the spell by 30 seconds, now it's only 15. That is a nerf to account for the fact that now your 4-piece will give you free Holy Wards, therefore reducing the cooldown of Salvation by a lot. The problem though is that this is nerfing a talent you already had, an effect you already had, and then putting that power into a tier set. You already had a decent cooldown reduction on Salvation from the 30-second cooldown reduction of the spell. Now that cooldown reduction was taken and put into your tier. So it's not that you gained anything new. This would be the equivalent of Blizzard taking away the Divine Image talent and then putting Divine Image as a tier set bonus. You are basically losing a tier set, because the only thing the tier set is doing for you is giving you back something you already had. This is a problem for Holy Priest. They have gotten their Echo of Light Mastery healing nerfed, they have gotten Prayer of Mending healing nerfed, the tier set further nerfed Prayer of Mending, so at the moment all of this together has lowered the value of Holy Priest. And at the moment what is even more dangerous is the fact that Discipline is also doing better. And we know that whenever one of the priest specs is better than the other, the losing one tends to just die and disappear. right? So at the moment, it's looking quite shaky for Holy Priest compared to the power that Discipline Priest currently has. The other two of the healers are Resto Druid and Resto Shaman. So Resto Druid, not much needs to be said. They continue to have the same thing we talked about last time, which is a very similar playstyle, except now your Grove Guardians are doing nearly a third of your healing. That's basically it. Whenever you get clear casting, you're going to be casting Regrowth. If we go and look at the buffs over here of the Resto Druid, we will find some 22 clear casting procs. The cast of Regrowth are 26, so more or less it fits. The rest of the time will be spent spamming Reju, using Swiftmans timed with Wild Growth, and then you let the Grove Guardians do your healing. The rest of your healing outside of big cooldowns, like big procs, is going to be very stable, very straightforward, not much of any, bursts of healing as a Resto Druid, and it continues like this current tier. As I said, if you can stomach having these AI guided NPCs healing people for you and doing a third of your healing, then you're gonna be fine continuing to play Resto Druid in the next season. The last one is Resto Shaman, which has been overall the weakest of the performing healers. We have to scroll quite far down to even find some nice slogging Resto Shamans. Now, the issue with the spec itself is two-faced. Phase number one, as we mentioned before, the tier set of Resto was nerfed. This was in the previous set of changes. Yes, it was the cutting in half of the proc chance of the 4-piece. Now, your Riptide only has a 5% chance to spread instead of a 10% chance to spread. This Shaman is activating the tier set with Chain Heal. You can also activate this tier set with Healing Wave, most likely. That's what other Shamans will likely go and do. But the result is the same. You see here 45 casts of Riptide and 33 of Chain Heal. Here you have 38 casts of Riptide and 32 of Healing Wave. The result is mostly the same. You cast Riptide and then you cast Healing Wave on the target. Riptide will spread from that target to a new one. You will cast Healing Wave on that target, rinse and repeat. Not much else will be done with your kit. You will continue this kind of whack-a-mole style of trying to spread as many Riptides as you can to as many players as you can. That is the style of this new build of Resto Shaman, which at the moment is proving to be a bit too weak. You do have, of course, the problem of trying to balance this difficult tier set for Shaman, because this can get out of control real fast in a raid, so it's perhaps a bit tricky to balance. If they find a nice number, this 5%, if it's balanced enough, perhaps it might be time to buff a few other bits of their kit, maybe, buffing back their Cloudburst, which has been nerfed over and over time, maybe increase the base healing of some of their abilities, perhaps things like Healing Rain, for example, just to up their stable HPS, which at the moment is lagging behind the other healers by quite a bit too much. Because compared to the other healers, after this first window into the healing in the Mythic testing, you have Preservation Evoker, Mistweaver Monk and Holy Paladin doing quite well, Restoration Druid and Discipline Priest being average, being solid overall, and then you have the bottom of the more underperforming ones being Holy Priest and Restoration Shaman. These two at the moment are the healers that seem to be needing more changes and more help overall compared to the rest. So we will see as we go deeper down the testing of 10.2 before the release, if and how these specs will be changed before the release of the patch. But for now, this is all we have for this Mythic raid testing recap when it comes to healers. It's time to leave you to the rest of your weekend. We are starting the goodbyes as usual by thanking all of the Patreon supporters for the contribution and help to the growth of the channel, which as usual can still be given completely for free. You can like and comment down below, as well as subscribe to the channel itself. So with these things out of the way, thank you guys again for watching. See you guys tomorrow, and in the meantime, I like the difference when I make videos like these, going from a white page to a black page, the shadow looming over the face all of a sudden. I like it. I like the style.